Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Rotary Club of York, the 22nd largest Rotary Club in the world. We really appreciate you joining us for our second online meeting today. Thanks to everybody who joined us last week as well. Now, I always look forward to these Rotary meetings on Wednesday, and for about the first 9 months of this particular Rotary year, the best part was the fellowship and the camaraderie that we all have at our weekly Wednesday meetings. Now, over the last couple of weeks, the real enjoyment for me is to be able to put on a collared shirt for a change. Every other day, it's a sweatshirt or a t-shirt. So thanks, everybody, for allowing me to wear a nice collared shirt today. Okay, a couple of quick announcements. Again, thanks for everybody who joined us last week. If you'd like to watch a video of last week's program, you can do that by going to our Facebook page and clicking on the link, which will take you over to our YouTube page. And you can watch the video on YouTube. And I'd like to wish all of our Christian and Jewish members both a happy Easter and a blessed Passover. It's that time of year. We're not connected like we normally are, and I believe most of us are probably not going to church or synagogue right now, but happy Easter and Passover nonetheless. Hopefully everyone's staying healthy and doing their appropriate social distancing right now. I know as I sit here by myself talking to all of you, I'm certainly socially distanced, and hopefully you're doing the same thing. Now, as you might suspect, our club has received several requests from the community to help out during this time of need. And right now, our club leadership team is trying to decide how we're going to respond to those requests and what kind of donations we're going to be making to the community. But regardless, whatever we decide, we'll make that decision very quickly, and it will be something that supports children and youth within the city of York and the immediate area here. A quick reminder that our Give Local York is coming up on May 1st. Thanks to Rotarian Megan Given for all of her hard work in putting this together. And obviously she's had to pivot quite quickly here this year and turning not only the online portion, which will continue, but having to unfortunately cancel some of the in-person portions of the Give Local York event. Nonetheless, we hope that you're able to participate. Our money that we raise through the Give Local York program this year will be earmarked for our Kiwanis Lake Improvement Project. And in fact, our speaker next week will be Aaron Jacobs, who will be talking about the Kiwanis Lake Project. So hopefully all of you can participate in Give Local York just coming up about 3 short weeks from now. All right, I'd like to do just a very quick local business spotlight of the Small Star Art House. Patty Stirk reached out to me and asked me if I could help her out in getting the word out that Small Star is now doing online movie viewing. And if you go to their website, you can check out all the different movies that are available. And there are ways to click on the different links to watch the movies. Some are free, some are paid, but nonetheless, it's a great way to see movies you might not otherwise see at a time where you can't actually go to a movie theater. And for anyone else out there who has had to change their way of doing business because of the COVID outbreak, please let me know, and I will do a shout out for you guys as well at next week's meeting. All right, now after last week's meeting, we got a little bit of feedback that asking a question wasn't as easy as we had hoped. So we did a real quick outline here to show how you can ask questions during and after this week's program. So on your screen, you should see something like this without the pink bars, of course, but there should be a question mark in a circle. If you click on that question mark, you'll get a box at the bottom of the screen, and you'll be able to type in any questions that you have for our presenter today. The question will automatically come in to me, and we're going to hopefully, if this all works correctly, I'll be then asking the questions to Tim at the end of his presentation. So anytime during the presentation, you can ask a question. You can wait till the end, whatever's convenient, but hopefully you have this screen and you can get this to work here this week for our presentation. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today. It is Tim Williams. He's a fellow Rotarian. I'm sure many of you have known Tim for several years now. He's a superintendent of the York Suburban School District, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about how York Suburban has changed what they're doing over the last few weeks. Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Josh. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Last week we saw a terrific presentation from Courtney about Bailey Coach and what they're doing, and they've had to shift things around and do things a little differently, and schools are facing the same kind of a challenge. And many schools are taking it on with gusto, and others are still trying to figure it out. York Suburban, we're doing a lot of things that I hope to do over the next couple of years, and we had to do them over a couple of weeks. So I'll go through those challenges we faced and what we decided to do about those challenges and to figure out a good way to continue educating students. Today's presentation is basically in 3 phases. The first phase, if it's hard to realize, but it was Friday the 13th for schools anyway, when everything just changed. So the first phase of the presentation is all surrounding one day. The second phase of today's presentation is the 2-week transition period, the 10 days that schools were just shut down for coronavirus. And the third phase is what we're calling the continuity of education. Your guess is as good as ours how long that'll last. I'm more planning on dealing with this for the remainder of the school year and hoping that we get to open in a traditional way starting in September. So you'll see that I'm using some colors here. You see the background of this screen is a gradient. The phase 1 background will be that lighter orange. The phase 2 backgrounds will be a darker orange, and the phase 3 backgrounds will be more of a brownish color, just so you have a visual cue as to what we're talking about in those phases. All right, so Friday the 13th was a typical in-service day. We looked like geniuses because we had scheduled an in-service day on Friday the 13th. This was scheduled long before coronavirus was even on the radar screen. And our in-service topic that day was trauma-informed care, which is a way to address students' needs who may be facing difficult challenges that we're just not aware of. And it's trying to be mindful of those challenges that students might face in their daily lives. You know, because we have students who sometimes we get frustrated because maybe they're not doing their homework, but maybe their issue was they were just worried about where their next meal was coming from. So they didn't give a rip about the homework that was assigned to them that night. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to get staff to be aware of and to try to address as best that they can, and being informed about how kids face challenges that we may not be aware of. So the trauma-informed care in-service day was very important for us as educators, and that was started at 8 o'clock on Friday the 13th. But then everything changed that morning, and we'll talk about how that transpired. The clock in the bottom left-hand corner will show you the times that we're talking about. So at 8:30, the superintendents had all been gathered up to meet with virtually with Secretary of Education Pedro Rivera. That conversation took place at 8:30, and the York County superintendents gathered at York Tech to hear that presentation from Pedro Rivera that morning. We fully expected to hear some guidance, words of wisdom, how we're going to proceed, those kinds of things, but essentially we got none of that. So what we had to do then, we had a 9 o'clock meeting that morning. We're still face to face, and the video conference was over. And the York County superintendents debated the issues and very quickly decided the best course of action is to close all the schools in York County. And that's what we did. So that morning, we decided to cancel all classes and all activities for 2 weeks, just so that we could wrap our heads around what we're going to have to do to continue education going forward. There was a suspected case of coronavirus in one of the districts, and knowing how interconnected all of our districts are, we decided it was prudent to close. So that's what we did. 11:45, I came back to York Suburban. The auditorium was full of our staff members who were receiving that in-service I had mentioned earlier. And that portion of the in-service is to be over at noon. So at 11:45, I walked in, told them that our world is about to change, and told them that we were closing down school for 2 weeks. That was the quietest I'd ever heard the auditorium, because maybe some were suspecting that might be the case, but most people were expecting that school was going to continue as usual. So to help them emphasize the point, I told them a little story about a gentleman just appeared on your screen who had been my father-in-law, had I met him before I married my wife. He was in World War II. He was in Normandy. He was part of the crew that had to help figure out how to get the tanks through the hedgerows in France during that invasion. He's one of the guys that welded those things on the front of tanks that chopped down the trees as the tanks moved through the hedgerows to get things done. If it weren't for that kind of ingenuity, the Allies may have been stuck on the beaches at Normandy for quite some time, and maybe the situation would have been unsuccessful. So it was that kind of ingenuity that I was calling upon our staff members to think about as we begin to transition to some kind of different new normal for us. So 11:45, our staff members learned that we were going to be shutting down for 2 weeks. And Franklin and Adams counties followed soon thereafter. Then the other counties were talking, and around 2:30 or 3 o'clock, Lancaster County decided they were going to close. They were going to close for 5 days. And other counties around the state followed suit. So you should be very proud of the York County superintendents. They actually led the way. Most people have no idea how this all unfolded, but that's essentially what happened. The York County superintendents got together and decided that this was the best course of action. PD still at this point has not made any decisions about anything. The governor's not made any decisions about anything. We figured that we're going to close in the interest of the safety of our kids and our staff, and we were hoping that other counties would follow suit, and that is essentially what happened. So by 5 o'clock, I think it was 5 o'clock that night, Governor Wolf decided that he was going to close schools for 2 weeks, which is essentially what York County superintendents had done that morning. So all schools in Pennsylvania be closed, including the cyber charter schools, and all charter schools closed for 2 weeks. So the summary of the timeline for how that transpired, you can see that the day started at 8 a.m. and by 5 p.m., the world had changed dramatically for schools, public schools in Pennsylvania. And that's essentially the timeline. So that leads us to week 2. Now, if you're not in public education, you probably don't have really any idea, nor should you, any idea of the regulations that govern what we do. We're actually a very highly regulated industry, if you think about it. But when we're closing schools, obviously we're not doing any instruction for these 2 weeks. And from the financial side, there are payroll implications. It might surprise you to learn that the Public School Code of 1949 requires professional staff to continue to be paid during any kind of pandemic like this. So we're paying staff, professional staff, to continue, well, not to work by school code. You have to know they were working anyway, trying to figure out how they're going to educate kids when we do open up again. But school code does not address the hourly staff. So the hourly staff at York Suburban and most other school districts, in fact, I think all of the other school districts, decided they were also going to continue paying hourly staff for several reasons. One, it's the right thing to do under the circumstances. And two, finding hourly staff and retaining hourly staff is difficult to this point in time. So we decided to go down that path. Legislation soon followed about a week later saying that, yes, you will continue paying hourly staff. So again, the York County school districts were leading the way in that. We also faced another interesting challenge. We have, and most people will be surprised to learn, that we have about 34% of our students that are involved in the free and reduced lunch program through the United States Department of Agriculture. Now think about that. 1 in every 3 kids who walks through our doors is receiving some kind of subsidized meal program. So if we're not open, they may not have the ability to acquire food like they would if we were open. So we had challenges to face there, and we decided we took a course of action on the second day of closure to get things up and running for students well, not just the free reduced students, for all students. We didn't restrict it to just free reduced. Any student age 1 to 18 who wanted a meal, breakfast and lunch, was able to get one. So down the bottom right is a picture of the food distribution we did. We had 3 locations. We did it at the middle school, the high school, and at Indian Rock Elementary, because geographically those 3 places cover the district pretty well. Our cafeteria contractors, the Whitson's Culinary Group, they did a fabulous job of getting things up and running and distributing meals. We asked them to do it between 9 and noon. They were easily able to do that. We asked them to prepare breakfast and lunch, so a student could walk up and get breakfast and lunch at the same time. As of Monday this week, we served 5,304 student meals and 114 adult meals during that time. Now the numbers are starting to trail off, but that's where we were as of Monday. Now, that covers the weekdays. We also have the issue of the weekends. And the York Suburban Education Foundation has a sub-foundation called the Impact Foundation, which is primarily run by students with the help of some adults in the foundation. And they have been doing a backpack program where students who have need can get food for the weekend on Fridays. And they've had that program and have ramped it up since this closure to help more students who may be in need. If any of you wish to help the foundation in their mission in the Impact Foundation, there's an email address right on the screen there. It's info@ysef.org. You may email them and offer whatever assistance you may wish to offer, whether it's financial or otherwise. And the foundation has also been helpful in coordinating with our social worker, Miranda King, who is doing yeoman's work right now in addressing the needs of families who are in need. So that's the food distribution end of what we're doing during these 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, we're also, as an organization in the cabinet level, preparing for what we're calling Learning Forward, which is going to be our continuity of education. We don't want to call it online learning because we're not sure online learning is the best way for students to learn. In fact, we're pretty sure it's not, but really that's the only avenue we have right now. But we're calling it Learning Forward instead of online learning. The division leaders of the academic, business, and special education and technology areas gathered together remotely to try to figure out how we're going to proceed and come up with strategies to make it sure that we can be successful in doing what we're trying to do. We first started out developing some common language. As I mentioned, Learning Forward is the term we're using for our continuity of education. And we had to first get people to understand the next 2 words, which are synchronous learning and asynchronous learning, because we're really good at face-to-face instruction, but now we have to transition to something else, and we need to have some language, some common language, so that people understand what we're talking about when we're discussing how we're going to go forward. So synchronous learning, as you might assume, is any kind of activity that's going on at the same time, where people are virtually face-to-face and doing some kind of educational activity in unison. Asynchronous learning would be activities that you can do pretty much any time of the day. You can do it nighttime in your PJs if you want to, or if you're an early morning person, you could do it then. So in the beginning, we're not quite ready for asynchronous learning. We are going to slowly transition into asynchronous. We're starting with from a synchronous foundation. So we had to plan how they're going to roll that out through the organization. So we all had to get everybody moving in the same direction. First thing we did was prepare the administrative team. We rapidly adopted Zoom as a video conferencing technology. And we had a whole lot of planning meetings to figure out how we're going to move forward. Then we had to prepare the teaching staff because, as I mentioned, they're really, really good at face-to-face instruction. Now I'm challenging them to be really, really good at virtual instruction. So we had virtual faculty meetings, we had virtual training sessions, all kinds of things to help teachers out during that time, during that 2-week shutdown. Most of that happened in the last 4 days of the 2-week shutdown. We also had to keep parents informed of what was going on. The URLs listed there are URLs that are on our main webpage. If you go to our main webpage, you can see a link to get to both of those spots, but those are the direct links to those pages. We had updates that came out mostly from me, but also from some other members of the organization, and those letters are posted there. And then the Forward Learning website is devoted strictly to what we're calling forward learning, so we can move forward. All in a kind of a unified language, unified path. So as part of that, during that you can only imagine how busy she is right now. She's established her own Zoom professional development room where teachers can gather, and she delivers virtual instruction on how to do virtual instruction, which is really quite a challenge, but she's doing a fabulous job. And it's all web-based. Now, the technology staff also had to do a quick transition. The first thing they need to do is figure out who needs what. By and large, at the secondary level, there's computing devices throughout. The elementary level, not as widely distributed for take-home. So the technology staff had to find out where the needs were. Now remember, 34% of our students are on free reduced lunch. So the chances of them needing some extra resources to get this stuff done are pretty high. And then they had to figure out a way in a pandemic to get equipment distributed to students. There was some need for secondary people to come in and get their Chromebooks and those kinds of things. The elementary level, we have equipment, but it mostly stays in the building. Of course, we can't do that now, so we had to create a distribution system via appointments to come in and pick up the equipment they would need to do the education they would need to do. Now, the technology department is now doing things in ways they had never imagined. First of all, internet access. The devices aren't a problem. We've got devices and we get them to people. The real problem is in internet access. Now, most people have it, but you got to keep in mind that 34% of our students are in free reduced lunches. So we've been providing information to all of our people, all of our parents and students about Xfinity Internet Essentials. Normally, their program is $10 a month. Right now, they're waiving the first 2 months fee for internet access if you're on free reduced lunch. They had some bars you had to jump over to get into that program. To their credit, they have removed those restrictions for now, so you don't need a lot of paperwork and those kinds of things to jump into the Internet Essentials program. So they're taking advantage of that. So we have students taking advantage of that. Xfinity hotspots, what Comcast has also done is they've opened up their various hotspots around the neighborhoods and in the businesses to allow students to hop on without having an account with Comcast. So they've done that. Students can also lurk in our parking lots and tap into our Wi-Fi that's already in the buildings. Some are doing that. Some have chosen to do that. Some do that just because they want to get out of the house and get some fresh air, and they can do some work that way. The technology department is also working with cell phone companies to try to get them to, allow some tethering to mobile phones and those kinds of things, and trying to work out solutions for that. And York Suburban will set up hotspots if needed, but we're trying to avoid that through these other means first. But as a last resort, we can do something like that fairly quickly in areas where we would need them. So that's what the technology department's been up to. In addition, they very rapidly ramped up an online chat room for tech support, which seems like kind of strange to have online tech support to help you get online, but it has been fairly effective. So they ramped that up very quickly. So at the end of that 2 weeks, I co-opted this image that we sent out before to the something bold was to be our comprehensive plan going forward, which over the next 2 years would have incorporated some kind of hybrid virtual learning. Now we're doing it in 2 weeks. So I took the image, spray painted over the coming soon, and wrote in here, something bold is here. And that's what we released on Friday before the first Monday of forward learning. So that takes us to the phase 3. Which is the actual instruction. Now, PA Department of Education really allowed school districts 3 options. One, do nothing. Well, that was not obviously something we were going to do. The second option is to provide review and enrichment. And again, that's not something that we found interesting. Instead, we wanted to continue educating. So we decided on planned instruction. And we want to be able to have students start up their next school year with an appropriate level of knowledge from the prior school year. So we initially went with synchronous kinds of activities and are having our staff, when they're comfortable, transition to asynchronous kinds of learning. As you can imagine, some staff members are ready to embrace asynchronous learning. Others are less eager to go down that path. But when you think about classroom instruction, no 2 teachers teach the same way in a brick and mortar environment, so why should we expect them all to be teaching the exact same way in an online environment? So that's been my approach. That's a message I've been giving them because I want them to be comfortable, as comfortable as they can be, and I want them to understand that I expect that they're going to make mistakes, and I also expect that they're going to learn from them. So they have the right to make an error without getting their hand slapped, as long as they learn from that error and move forward and improve. So this is a learning curve for all of us, including the people who wear suits and ties. It's been a fun journey so far, and I expect that will continue. So at the end of that 2-week shutdown, we had everything ready to go on March 30th for secondary students, grades 6 to 12, and the elementary students on April 1st, a few days later. And here's how we structured it initially. Initially, we structured it so that we followed, think back to snow days and think about when your children might have been in school or when you might have been in school. 2-hour delay was a situation where, the snow's on the ground and you come to school 2 hours later. So we already have schedules built for that. So, and it's something we're familiar with. Some winters more familiar than others. But this winter, we fortunately did not have to use very much in the way of delays and closures for snow. So we followed a 2-hour delay schedule, which meant that staff members could have meetings and professional development in the first 2 hours of the day. They weren't sitting at home doing nothing. They were working in those first 2 hours. And then the student day started 2 hours later than normal. So the teacher office hours are the first 2 hours of the day. And then synchronous schedule followed that day for education, because we wanted to do something where we didn't want to have teachers scheduling face-to-face meetings virtually that would conflict with each other. So for example, we didn't want to have a student choose between which synchronous meeting he or she was going to attend. So we decided to go with a 2-hour delay schedule that was regimented so that wouldn't happen. So that took one of the challenges away right away. So that has proven to be very effective. And in the classroom environment, these are the things that we encouraged our staff members to employ when they're meeting with their students every day. We're trying to make it a welcoming environment where everybody can enjoy being there and participate and have some fun, and also learn at the same time. Now, here's an example of an activity that occurred, and I think there was a newspaper article related to this. Stephen Courtney is a musician based in Lancaster County, but he's regional. My own children are in the 20s now, and when they were younger, they used to love Stephen Courtney, and I'd take them to his shows, and they'd have a great time. And he's very educational and promotes music and music education and those kinds of things. This was arranged by Dr. Manos, the principal at Valley View Elementary. And you can see Dr. Manos sitting there on the left, viewing the screen of the live video chat that Stephen Courtney was doing with all of our kindergartners, then our first graders, and then our second graders. He did 3 shows that morning for our students. So you can sort of think of it as an assembly, but done virtually. It was a way to get students comfortable and get them engaged in the online learning process. I had great fun watching all these little windows of students on the screen and jumping up and down to the dancing and singing of Stephen Courtney. It was a great experience. So kudos to the Valley View staff and Dr. Manos for pulling that off. He did a wonderful job. So in general, how did it go in phase 3? Well, I was surprised to learn that most of the classes had as few as 1 or 2 students absent. So if you think about it, that's pretty significant considering the challenges we were facing getting connectivity and devices into the hands of students. Right now, we're thinking we may have to address individually 4 to 5% of our student body as far as connectivity and access. But the participation has been outstanding, and we're receiving some positive feedback from parents. But for me, the really big takeaway here is that teachers are learning new strategies for when we do get back to normal. I want teachers to be using electronic kinds of means in their face-to-face education. I want them to get into a more hybrid learning environment. That was what we were planning to do over the next 2 years. Now, because of this pandemic, we're taking advantage of the pandemic to get them to be comfortable doing that as soon as we open up face-to-face brick and mortar education, hopefully in September. Now, this doesn't happen with just one person. There's a whole lot of people involved in this process, but I'd really like to call out a handful of people. Mrs. Allie Cunningham is an English teacher, and she's also our technology integrator. She's doing yeoman's work, getting teachers up to speed and getting them comfortable with things that they never imagined they would have to do. She's been fantastic. Mr. Vince Henry is our director of technology. He's not getting any sleep. Him and his staff are just going nuts trying to get everything up and running and organized. Dr. Krauser and Dr. Ketterman have both been really essential in getting everything rolled out for forward learning, and they've been terrific leaders in that regard. But the leadership extends down the building level. You've got the high school principals and the middle school principals and the elementary principals who have been just doing fabulous work in getting their staffs going in the right direction. I should note that Dr. Michael Snedden, the new middle school principal, his district was holding him for 60 days. And then when the pandemic hit, they decided they didn't need to hold him anymore. So he started with us during the closure and he jumped right in and has picked up right where he needed to pick up and has been a great leader. All these folks on the screen have been terrific leaders, and without them, none of this would be happening. So I'm very grateful for all of their hard work. They've been phenomenal. So with that, we can leave it open for questions.
Tim, thank you very much. Really appreciate your presentation. And we do have a couple questions here, so let me read down through these. What are you planning to do for graduation?
We don't know. The honest answer is we don't know yet. We're trying to figure out some way to make it significant for students. We just don't know.
I'm sure that's a question that comes up pretty often in your world over the last couple of weeks. Got to be a challenging situation to figure out an answer to. So we'll look forward to hearing what that is when you guys figure that out.
Yeah, and the same answer for prom and any of those other activities too.
All right, our next question is, what plan do you have in place for athletics and any tryouts that might need to happen?
That's a great question. That's also a question we are hearing a lot. The PIAA, which is a governing body for athletics in Pennsylvania schools, has not addressed the issue in any way, shape, or form. In fact, they had a meeting recently, and it really wasn't even an agenda item. Strangely, it seems to me that they're still holding out hope of holding, basketball finals, winter sports finals for the sports that have not completed those activities yet. From my point of view, and the superintendents are talking about this, trying to figure out how best to proceed. From my point of view, to ramp up a spring sports season so quickly, I'm not sure is in the best interest of athletes. You need to have some time for athletes to become fit for their sports. There's no guarantee they're staying fit right now. And so you have to have organized practices to get them fit. So I would not be surprised if we will not have a spring sports season for the 1920 school year.
Do you think that will extend into fall sports as well, or is it too early to know?
Yeah, that's really too early to know. I guess a lot really depends on what happens with COVID-19 and social distancing and the things that the country in general is trying to do to mitigate the problem.
The next question is regarding the 180-day calendar year required by the state. What's the current status of that, and will school be extended, or has that already been forgiven?
That's also another really great question. The initially when PDE closed the schools for 2 weeks, they declared that those 10 days, those 10 school days, did not need to be made up. So essentially, then it became a 170-day school year. As far as PDE was concerned, here's how I view it. Of those 10 days, 4 of those days, we had solid professional development for our staff, which qualifies as something called an Act 80 day. All 4 of those days would be considered Act 80 days, and Act 80 days count as student days. So there's 4 of the 10. The Department of Education got a waiver from the federal government for standardized testing, PSSAs, Keystones, those kinds of things. That gives us back essentially 5 or 6 instructional days. So if you add all that up, you're at 180. So my feeling right now is that our school year will end at the scheduled end date.
Very good. Next question. What has been the biggest tactical challenge that you've faced? How have you solved it?
Well, the biggest tactical challenge that the organization faced was getting devices and connectivity into the hands of those who needed them. That's a huge challenge because we're faced with something called FAPE, which is free and appropriate education. So for most students, providing FAPE is not difficult. For other students who have other challenges, either emotionally or physically, providing FAPE becomes more of a challenge and potentially opens us up to lawsuits. So that's the most daunting task we've taken on because we want to continue education of students and we're doing what we can to provide FAPE, but that is the biggest challenge that we have.
Thanks. Next question is, how will you be resolving testing, PSSAs, grades, etc., throughout the end of this school year?
Yeah, well, PSSAs and Keystones and those kinds of things, they're non-existent for this school year. As far as traditional grades, at the secondary level, what we're doing is for the 3rd marking period, finishing up the 3rd marking period because it wasn't quite finished up when the pandemic hit. And then for the 4th marking period, we're looking at pass-fail kinds of grades for the 4th marking period and trying to figure out how best to figure out GPAs in that scenario. We don't have all the answers on that yet, but that's the general direction we're headed.
And a follow-up to that one, will the upper level students, high school age students, be having final exams this year?
I don't know the answer to that just yet. We would like to. Of course, we have concerns, or I don't so much have concerns, but we have staff members have concerns about integrity of those exams in a virtual environment, that kind of a thing. So stay tuned.
So right now, how are students receiving their grades for the work that they're doing?
That happens in each classroom, same way it had in the past. You know, they're it's really no different. Uh, unless in the fourth marking period, you're talking about pass fail. So each teacher gets to figure that out, how they're best going to do that with the guidance of the building principal. But in general, it's not that different than it would be in a brick and mortar environment.
So are students receiving all of their grades then through the online portal, and they can go on there and check exactly how they did on any specific assignment?
The honest answer is I assume so. Honestly, I haven't checked on that.
Very good. So how will teachers at the end of this school year determine whether students are ready to proceed to the next grade level?
Well, I think the Pennsylvania Department of Education has determined that all students will be promoted to the next grade level, if I'm not mistaken. But what we're doing is trying to figure out, and we haven't figured out how we're going to do that, with 3 marking periods of traditional grading and then a 4th marking period of pass fail. So we're still in the process of figuring out exactly how that mathematically will work out, but that's what we're working on right now.
Okay. Next question says, are there going to be continued conference calls with all of the superintendents from the various districts within the county? And if so, are those calls accessible to, say, private school leaders or charter school leaders as well?
No, as far as the charter schools, I don't have an answer for that, but private schools, no. This is just the superintendents getting together to share how we're dealing with the various. Remember, I mentioned earlier that we're a highly regulated industry, and we're trying to navigate all that during a pandemic. So that's what those conversations are usually about. And for private schools, they don't face the same kinds of challenges as far as regulations are concerned that the public schools do. As far as charter schools, I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. So if all of the students, this is a follow-up to the previous question, if all of the students will be elevated to the next grade level, you see a situation in which some of the students who are right on the bubble will need to play catch up if they're promoted to the next grade level?
Yeah, the third marking period is the challenge because getting them to finish the third marking period will pretty much help them get promoted to the next level. If they don't complete the work for the third marking period and are failing, a pass-fail grade in the fourth marking period isn't going to help them. So finishing up the third marking period with some success is really key here, and that's what the teachers and students are shooting for. Fortunately, it's not a high percentage of our students that we're worried about in that regard, but there are a few who, in fact, I got a phone call from a parent on that very issue, in which case I directed them back to the principal, actually back to the teacher and then the principal, because the conversation should be between the parent and the teacher, not the parent and the superintendent. There's a chain of command to follow in those sense things, and the problem should be resolved at its lowest level possible, which is between the parent and the teacher. The student is responsible for the grade, of course, but if the parent is confused as to why the kid's failing, that's a conversation that he or she should have with the teacher.
Okay, so the next question is do you see this situation creating the need for a larger investment in technology in the next few years?
From a statewide perspective, I see it's demonstrating the need for broadband access statewide. It's not so much a problem in York County, although I do have colleagues in the southern end of the county. One school district in particular, they had 20 teachers that geographically lived in areas that had no internet access available to them. And that was 20 of their staff members. So you can imagine the challenge they were facing with students. That was probably a much higher number for students not having access. So I think it has really emphasized how statewide there needs to be more of an effort to provide broadband access to everyone, not just those who live in a city or near a city and have access to Comcast or some other provider. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from the pandemic.
And I'd like to close with a comment here that someone sent in rather than a question. It says, thank you, Dr. Williams, for all the amazing work that you and your staff have done, as well as the schools across our county over the last several weeks. No one has been trained for or experienced a scenario like this, and everyone should be commended. I think that's a great way to close the meeting today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. They certainly don't teach us this in doctoral school. I like a challenge, and this is certainly a challenge, and all of my colleagues are embracing it wholeheartedly in all districts in York County. So Rotary members should be proud of what their districts are doing in this pandemic. So thank you very much.
Tim, thank you. We really appreciate your presentation today. I know it was sort of unexpected, and we really appreciate you jumping in here as quickly as you did. And I know it's something that was of interest to all of our members for sure. And if we could, everyone, please give Tim a virtual applause. You won't be able to hear it, but right now everybody's applauding for you.
Thank you very much.
Members, thank you very much for joining us today for this meeting. We look forward to seeing all of you or hearing all of you next week when our speaker will be Aaron Jacobs, who will talk about the Kiwanis Lake Improvement Project. Until then, be safe and social distance. Thank you.
Thank you.